Hello everybody and welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be touching on the imperial tombs of the Byzantine emperors and a possible connection to our hidden history. Now, what makes these tombs unique is the stone with which they're constructed of. It's a type of granite called porphyry, and it's typically purple or red in color. And here's just a photo showing 3 of these tombs in front of the Archaeological Museum in Istanbul. Now, the unique element to this type of stone, this porphyry, is that it can only be quarried in one place in the world, and that is in Egypt, at this particular site where there's this mountain. And as you can see by some of these photos, very inhospitable, remote location. And today it's very much in a ruinous state. Now, according to the history, this particular site was discovered in 14 AD. But one of the mysteries is that they stopped all production. All the quarrying of this particular stone was stopped, I think, around 335 AD, or somewhere in the 4th century. So even before the start of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, well before that, they stopped quarrying the stone. So people are kind of trying to figure out why that happened. I think I have some ideas, but yeah, so it's in a ruinous state today, and we're going to touch on that. But what I wanted to add is that this would have been a whole settlement. In addition to a quarry, you would have had houses, temples, and workshops. And just like a lot of sites that we look at, this particular site was lost to history. I found a blog spot talking about that. It's almost hard to believe that for ages the quarry was lost. So there's this mystery surrounding what happened, why did they stop quarrying the site, and then the site gets lost to history only to be rediscovered in 1823. Now, there is the ruins of a temple that is still available for people to see, but again, this is a really remote site. But it's the Temple of Serapis, and it just lies in ruin. Like a lot of these sites, they're just destroyed. And I came across another website just talking about how production at the quarries eventually stopped. And I think he was just speculating it must have been some sort of economic disruption, or climate change must have been the chief factors. But apparently the experts are baffled. Well, I think I have some speculations anyway. Here's just another photo showing the ruins of this site. But I think this is linked potentially to a major destructive event, a worldwide event that I think brought an end to a lot of empires, including what we call the Roman Empire, potentially the Maya civilization, and buried a lot of other civilizations as well. So again, that's sort of my view at the moment, but I think that's the reason why production stopped, and maybe the climate changed is because of this event. Now, I'm going to touch back on these tombs, but I wanted just to briefly talk about this porphyry stone for a little bit longer, because in addition to making tombs, there were also columns made of this stone. And there's one still located in Istanbul, what used to be Constantinople. And it still exists, but it's referred to nowadays as the burnt column, because there was an event, I believe in the 1700s, that caused it to be burnt. But if you look at some of the older depictions of it, the base of this column looks like it has been altered, and I guess there was a statue on top of it, which is now no longer there. But I think it's definitely well over 100 feet, and I think it's comes in sections. It's held together by bands of iron, I believe. Now, what's interesting about this particular column is that in addition to being a burnt column, which again they say was caused by earthquake and fires in the 1700s, it's also, the column's original platform is about 8 feet below ground. So we have a burnt column, and a portion of the column is 8 feet below ground level. And I think it's these steps here on the left-hand side. This is all, or mostly below the current ground level. Why do I think that's interesting? I'm gonna address that here shortly, but I wanted to mention just one more thing. According to the history, this column was the central part of the Forum of Constantine. It was located in the center of this forum. And today, none of this exists. And we're told the reason why it doesn't exist is because of the Crusaders, the Fourth Crusade in, I believe, 1204. Major fires and looting and destruction. So they're the cause of why this forum no longer exists. But they say this was destroyed in a large part because of fire. Again, we have a burnt column that they say was burnt and destroyed, well, burnt in the 1700s. And then we have this forum which no longer exists. They tell us it was destroyed and damaged because of fires, but in the 1200s. Okay, and then we also have portions of this column are now 8 feet below ground level, the current ground level. So burnt and below ground level. Why? I'm gonna tie this in a neat bow here in a second, but just a recreation of what this forum might have looked like in the past. So yeah, okay, so they're telling us the earthquakes and a fire in the 1700s caused the column to be burnt, as well as the surrounding neighborhood was destroyed. Well, I've touched upon Istanbul in a previous video. There's a lot of things that are burnt and buried in Istanbul. And in a previous video I touched upon, there is this metro station that they were doing excavations in, I think 2010, 11 or 12, and they stumbled upon this ancient harbor or port of Theodosius, and they found like 30 ships. They found thousands of animals, but they were buried under 10 to 40, 50 feet of sediment. And then less than a mile and a quarter away, there used to be a hippodrome here. And a hippodrome is like, I guess they would race chariot racing and these sorts of things. But today, most of the hippodrome is destroyed. And this was all above ground at one point. But these arches are now, some of them are, the remains of some of these arches are now below the current ground level. So there was some event that buried large portions of this area in Istanbul, what used to be Constantinople. Now, this column, so this hippodrome and this port were about 1.25 miles away. I've got another graphic here. This is where this column would be, and I still have this location of where that harbor, they found that harbor, and it's actually only 1 mile away, so it's closer. This is closer than the hippodrome, so it's closer, and portions of this column are buried as well and burnt. So what I'm thinking is the reason why this column is partially buried and burnt was because of and the reason why this harbor is covered in layers of sediment, and the reason why this hippodrome was largely destroyed and partially buried is, I feel it's because of this destructive event in the first millennium. The same event that I theorize has brought an end to the quarrying of that particular stone in Egypt, and may be responsible for the climate change in that region as well. So that's sort of my views, and I just, I'm showing here, there's articles talking about in a lot of basements in present day Istanbul, you can explore the old world, traces of it in people's basements. So a lot of buried things, a lot of things that are burnt and damaged, and I think it was one major event in the first millennium. Now, getting back to these tombs, these made of that porphyry stone, that granite, speaking of things that are buried, they found, I believe this was a lid for one of these tombs, and they found it under a tree in 1916 during excavations, and it's an ancient plane tree. Now, I'm not sure how old this tree was, but speaking just of things being buried, and then, we know that these lids date back, associated with the tombs, these sarcophagi, they date back to the first millennium. So I can't help thinking the reason why this is all buried because of the same event. And this is just another photo from a different angle, but on the left you can see the lid, and they believe the lid goes to the tomb of Julian that was discovered in 1916 beneath a tree in this particular area, and I believe 2 lids were found at the same time, but there doesn't look like a ton of room for bodies actually. Just weird. All these things are buried or destroyed, and I think we're just given a lot of reasons, earthquakes, tsunamis, things like crusades, but I think we're looking at a major destructive event in the first millennium. That is just my view. So, and I just wanted to mention, I guess there were 94 Byzantine emperors, and around 10% of these sarcophagi have survived. And despite enormous efforts they took, only one Byzantine emperor was found in his tomb. And I guess it wasn't even in one of these tombs, it was in like a wooden coffin. And the reason why all these tombs are just, a lot of them are damaged, and the reason why apparently is because of when the Ottomans took over, they cleared out all the tombs and burials they could find. So I just wanted to throw that in there. So just kind of interesting, just another element to all this, and I just wanted to touch on it. Now I just wanted to do one more random update. I came across another star fort in the Vauban style in western Brazil, and I believe it's right on the border with Bolivia, I believe. And this fort is just, it's so remote, and I believe they say it was built in the late 1700s by the Portuguese. And there's just not a ton to defend out here, but when you look at some of the older photos, it was completely taken over by the jungle. So there was a couple expeditions in the early 1900s to sort of clear out all the jungle remnants. And this entrance is interesting. There's these steps that they've placed so you can kind of walk up to the entrance, but it's off center, and I'm just wondering, does this look like recent work here? Do you think they created this after the fact, or was it always like this? I'm not sure, just mentioning that. But in addition to that interesting entrance, there's been a lot of archaeological digs within this particular star fort, and I found this article which I had to translate, but it was just talking about how more than 40,000 pieces have already been found in the excavations inside the fort. So just a really remote place, and this was, I think, a news article from 1913, I believe. So yeah, just another questionable fort for me in the middle of nowhere. And this is kind of hard for me to verify because of the language barrier, but there is supposedly some interesting formations in the jungles relatively close to this star fort, and you have these almost geometric patterns in the jungle, and just really interesting stuff. And there was a LiDAR image that I've seen, and I'm not sure of the veracity of it, but it seems to show some potential structures. And there's speculation that there's tunnels leading from this star fort to the surrounding jungle and potentially some of these structures that are underneath the jungle presently. So a lot of weird things surrounding this star fort, and I thought I'd just mention it to you guys. Now, once again, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons. Your help is always greatly appreciated. And I think that's about it for today. So until next time, take care. Bye.
Take me back to Constantinople. No, you can't go back to Constantinople. Been a long time gone. Constantinople, why did Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the Turks.